If you're a writer, you've undoubtedly experienced self-doubt and anxiety about your work, whether that's just doubting whether your work is any good at all, whether that's the fear of sharing it with people and receiving feedback and criticism. Those kinds of fears and anxieties are just part of what it means to be a writer or even just an artist more broadly, because you're sharing something that's deeply personal with the world. You're being vulnerable with the world by sharing your work and putting it out there to be torn to shreds, to be criticized, or to be praised. So ever since I've self-published my first novel on Amazon, I've been trying to sell it, obviously, because I want people to read it, because I put hours and hours and hours of time and effort into it, because I think it has an important message that I want people to hear and understand. And yet every time I think about this book, which is just out there for the world to read if they so choose, I get really anxious and I question my decision to even publish it at all. I wonder what people who've read it think of me now. All these fears kind of come up. And I think this is very common, especially with debut novels or debut works of art, especially when they were written or the idea was developed in your youth. So when I started writing this book, A Portrait of the Malefactress as a Young Woman, which is for sale on Amazon, I was a teenager. I think the idea for this book was conceived already in grade 12, and I for sure had started writing it by my first and second years of university. And even though I finished it just a few years ago in my 20s, to me this still seems like the book of my teenagehood. And so yeah, I'm anxious about how it's going to age, and I wonder if the older I get, the more I'll look back at this as, number one, just not well written or well executed. Number two, just kind of embarrassing, like too vulnerable. My style as a writer is I have these grandiose ideas and themes and messages that I want to portray in a work of writing. And yeah, as conceptions, they're great, but I don't know if I actually execute them as well as I could. If the ideas in my head are actually being properly translated into the stories that I write, I'm not sure that I'm there yet. And I think that when I read through this, I'm going to obviously pick up on those themes and ideas that I was trying to communicate, but find that they failed to kind of come across in the right way. To me, it seems like the entire book would then be a failure if I haven't successfully communicated my message clearly, and if readers aren't walking away from this book with a clear understanding of what I'm getting at. And I'm a little worried that maybe I have been misunderstood in this book. So all this to say, I'm going to be rereading my debut novel in this video. So yeah, I have a bad headache today, so I'm just gonna sit quietly and not overexert myself, but just read through this and hopefully share my thoughts and feelings along the way. A quote from Chapter 15, The Book of Beautiful Words. A writer's great love is not a word, not even two, nor is it a sentence strung together as an immortal imprint of herself. A writer's great love lies behind the word, the sentence, the paragraph, the story. All writing serves a purpose, and behind it all is some ethereal sentiment that she must, on pains of death, craft into tangible lines in order to remember. Behind my writing is love and hurt and envy and desire, a million little moments, and a handful of creatures who made up my living and breathing and dreaming. Behind every word is him. Alright, chapter 1, here goes. Okay, so the biggest problem I'm finding with my book from the outset is that the timeline doesn't really make sense. So I start at a certain point and then go back in history a few years, which I think is a little bit confusing and not clarified as much as it could be. And then the other thing is I have 6-year-olds having conversations that are maybe conversations that 10-year-olds would have. Maybe 8 or 9-year-olds. I don't know, when I was writing this, I don't think I had any idea what a 6-year-old looked like and what they were capable of doing, because I just feel like some of the things that these 6-year-olds are doing and saying are too advanced and above their age level. And I remember I did have this thought while I was still writing the book, and I just kind of ignored it because I didn't feel like doing the work to change it and make it more realistic. And part of my idea was that the characters are supposed to be somewhat intellectually advanced for their age. So yeah, I'm not sure whether it's worth changing it at this point or just leaving it and having that be one of the unrealistic parts of the story. I don't think that a story always needs to be super realistic, because a story can be truthful and tell the truth even if it has some sort of fantastic or supernatural or kind of unrealistic elements. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I actually have marked up the book a lot with just wording and phrasing changes. Yeah, there was a number of paragraphs where I'm like, I just don't like the way this sounds anymore. And some of my word choices I found kind of poor. Yeah, potentially by the time I'm through this book again, there will be a lot of edits to make, which is good because edits are improvements. By the time I turned 18, I was ready for a journey to a school with freedom in its name, ready to scratch the coffins of the greats and take their words and rewrite the story of how it all led to me, how every thought in history was held captive to me, the arbitrator between then and now, existence and consciousness, and ready to forge in the smithy of my soul an artful something that made sense of it all. I still find some of the romancy scenes quite embarrassing. I definitely wrote some of these when I was not very experienced myself, so... One thing I've found, and this is actually quite surprising, is that every time I reread my work, I'm struck by different things and I come away with different sort of applications or thoughts. For one, I used to enjoy the first half of the book much more than the second half, and now I kind of felt like the first half fell flat a little bit, and as I'm reading and getting into the second half, I'm enjoying myself more, if that makes sense, which is weird. It's interesting because obviously this book is my own creation. It's all my own ideas. I had certain themes in mind when I wrote this book. Out of all the people in the world, I am the most familiar with the details of this story. It's my story. These are my characters. It's fully my creation. And yet, as I'm reading, sometimes I'm like, did I really write this? Or I find something new or something that I didn't even realize was there in the story, and yet I wrote it. I just wasn't fully conscious of it. And that's the thing about writing. Sometimes you're writing and you all of a sudden realize that it's not even you who's writing. It's like there's a force working through you to get this story down, and you're not even fully conscious of the meaning of what you're doing and what you're writing, and the story almost writes itself. You as the author are just kind of left to let it happen. Around the time I joined Pallas, I began to scutter around Amsterdam in a flurry, for there were years and years of knowledge and culture to digest. There had been no museums in Arnhemport, but in Amsterdam history was at my fingertips in that rusty physical way beyond the capacity of books. There was the Rijksmuseum and the Stedelijk and the Rembrandthuis. There were halls of chalky things, of earthenware and cold metallic steel, of yellow human foliage and of frozen acrylic ardor. Throughout my first autumn and winter in Amsterdam, between classes and on evenings, when I could no longer bear the lonesome company of Mrs. Metchemeyers, I examined the closet of my civilization, ink, oil, and clay. I longed for history to reveal to me the secrets of being. In the frescoes of the ancient Mycenaeans I sought a depiction of myself, but I was not there. I was not a soldier, nor a sailor, nor a smith, though I was fond of swords and ships and sanders. There was Bathsheba at her bath, an impregnable portrait, though should an artist have given me the rolling stomach of that mistress, I should have launched myself into the sea. Rembrandt's eye was not my own. In the night watch men stood in shadows as they do in the light. The return of the prodigal son was my undoing. Who was a father who forgave? What a notion, to be welcomed back with open arms. It was not a mortal tale. "I'm just thinking," he said. It was not as cold and hard and ugly as nothing, but it was not original, nor romantic. "About what?" I asked, feeling as if I were in some book by some foolish young girl, thinking she knew enough about romance to write about it. "About what I'm doing here, I suppose." "Which is what, Martine?" I moved closer to him. "Learning about you. Learning a person is like reading a book for the first time. There is only ever one first look, one first taste, one first linking of syllables and coming together of the trails and threads that make up a story, that make up a person. You can never come back to your favorite book and read it anew, for the first time, again. And so you must learn a person slowly, carefully, appreciating each syllable, each thread slowly unspooling. For a person is only a stranger once, before she is your own hand, or perhaps even your own heart. If there was one thing I learned during my time with Martijn, it was that genius was possible, and with it great foolishness. He knew next to everything. We talked and talked our nights away, and I came to know that I knew nothing except myself. Martijn was exactly the man I'd first envisioned with reverence and awe, the lonely, isolated genius whose memory was infinite and whose capacity for understanding was unparalleled, and this came to terrify me, rather than comfort me. One night he explained to me the entire history of the world, drawing his finger along the crevices of civilizations I had not even heard of, and piling details like atoms into pictures like molecules. How he remembered it all, I knew not. How he pieced it all together, I knew not. Other nights he explained entire philosophical systems as if they were the product of his own mind. Familiarity. There was no person, no concept, no city, no people, no era, no idea with which he was not familiar. He fit into the world perfectly, as if the entire earth were his country, as if all of time was his lifetime. It was agonizing. I knew a little of the Saracens, and of the Dutch Golden Age, and of Hume, and of the Zhou dynasty, and of Confucian philosophy, and of America, but a little was a little, and a lot was a lot. There was a great chasm between us, and Martijn could not come over and wet my tongue with a drop of water, even if he wanted to. I remembered Jela's humble brilliance, and the way I had shone alongside it. With Martijn, things were different. Having seized knowledge fully, he ran with it until he could no longer, and when he came to the place where what is seen and felt and known and thought cannot reach, he merely stood at the edge of it, and with the entire world upon his shoulders he smiled and leapt. If his feet hit the ground, I did not hear him. All I know is that he jumped, and I was left behind. And although I'd done all I could, everything, to wring the knowledge of the world from his hands, and even though I caused his foot to stumble many times in his marathon, still he leapt, and still he disappeared, and so I stand there still, at the edge of it, wondering, wondering, wondering. I just finished reading my novel all the way through for the first time in the year since I published it. Before I began, I was doubtful that it would hold up by my own standards, 1 year more developed, but I'm pleased to say that it has. It's certainly not perfect. In fact, I made many marks and scratches and word change suggestions as I flipped through my paper copy, and at times I had to scratch my head and wonder whether I'd really communicated what I meant to say, but overall, this book is what it was meant to be. It's what my teenage self dreamed of, and my young adult self completed with satisfaction. All I've ever wanted from this book was the preservation of my soul on the precipice of adulthood, and it has done that. What's more, in many moments it does so beautifully. Not every line reaches its poetic potential, but many do, and the characters are alive, living and breathing as they did and still do in me. Annika's tortured existence is haunting. Franz's deep displacement is too. Martijn's weakness makes him all the more appealing, and Jela, good Jela the Redeemer, is as he is and should be. Yes, I'm proud of these friends of mine, these friends that I gave life, but who carry these pages for me. What surprises me most is how this novel, of which I wrote every word, seems to have a heart and soul of its own, something beyond me, and so I can rest in what it is and let it be. It speaks for itself, not for me. This thing of my creation has gone beyond its creator, and I couldn't help being surprised, stunned, overwhelmed, disturbed, and encouraged at various points, even though it is my own. I suppose my relationship to my writing is like my relationship to myself, in that there is no perfect understanding or control. As I am often a mystery to myself, so is my book a strange and surprising thing. It is a dark book, and my life has not been particularly dark, though the girl who wrote it struggled and wrestled. She still does. And yet the message of hope shines through unmistakably once one sees Jela and knows the meaning of his name. And I couldn't help thinking, though so far I felt embarrassed to recommend my book too strongly, that I should like people to experience Annika's coming home to him, because it is a homecoming we all must make if we are to have hope and peace. With that, I leave you, dear watcher. I would be so pleased and so encouraged if you'd read A Portrait of the Malefactress as a Young Woman and let me know what you think of Annika and Jela and Franz and Martijn and the others. Readers are what make writers' dreams realities, and you have no idea how much it would mean to me if you took the time to consider what I have written. So thank you so much for being here, for listening to me talk about my writing and share my book and my experience as a young wannabe novelist. Thank you so much, and please do like this video, please do comment and let me know what you think about this video or about my book. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.